resolution questions the moral permissibility of hypothetical actions to the value of morality. The resolution lacks a specified actor, so affirming defense. The resolution statement is morally sound, not that it is obligatory maximum laudable action or possible scenario. Any action is morally permissible if we allow it. By definition, all actions are allowed if not forbidden. As such, the range of permissible options includes actions for which our disposition is indifferent. Morality is a system of norms developed by various institutions and individuals designed to guide an individual towards a good life. Though independent, all morality share a fundamental function in addressing crises of autonomy. Pierre Doe writes, experience consists in becoming sharply aware of the tragic situation of human beings. We are not free at all, for it is not up to us to be beautiful, strong, healthy, or rich, to feel pleasure, to escape suffering. All these things depend on the causes which are external to us. The necessity which is inexorable and different to our individual interests makes our aspirations and our hopes. We are helpless and defenseless in the face of the accidents of life, the setbacks of fortune, illness, and death. Everything in our life escapes us. The result of this is that people are unhappy because they passionately seek to acquire things, but they cannot obtain complete evils which are inevitable. Thus, morality is best understood as the recognition of indifference. Humans are powerless over natural forces. This lack of control cannot upset us. Individuals in pursuit of virtue must embrace indifference. Doe 2 continues. If I am out on the high seas and perceive the peal of thunder and the whistling winds of a storm, I cannot deny that I perceive these terrifying sounds, for that is a comprehensive objective presentation. However, my perception of these sounds will no doubt cause me to state of terror, which is a passion. Under the sway of emotion, I will say to myself, here I am in a state of misery, I may die, and death is an evil. But if I give assent to this inner discourse which is caused by terror, I will be in error, since my fundamental existential option is precisely that there is no other evil than moral evil. Error is situated in the value judgments which I bring to bear upon events. The right moral attitude consists in recognizing as good or evil only that which is morally good or evil, and recognizing as indifferent that which is morally neither good nor bad. The category of indifference defines the domain of permissibility and morality and either prohibits or obligates such things when we take these actions, even though we have no reason to recommend or discourage them. Since the resolution assigns no context, the moral framework for the ground must be rooted in basic human experience as opposed to culturally specific or historically variable dictates. The only consistent basis for morality is indifference, as Doe 3 explains. The judgments people make about the value of pleasure and suffering, or life and death, are based on mere convention. In fact, it is impossible to know whether a given thing is good or bad in itself. People's unhappiness comes from the fact that they want to obtain what they think is good, or to escape from what they think is bad. But if we refuse to make this kind of distinction between things, and refrain from making value judgments about them, or from preferring one thing to another, if we say to ourselves, this is no better than that, we will achieve peace and inner tranquility, and will no longer feel the need to talk about such things. It doesn't matter what we do as long as we do it with an attitude of indifference. It is not just permissible, but absolutely necessary to maintain an attitude of indifference toward things which cannot be regulated by human action or judged to be good or bad. This indifference allows us to judge morality of an action by recognizing the degree of autonomy at play rather than blindly applying received wisdom without consideration of details. I advocate the global attitude of indifference as the only way to address crises of autonomy that occur when individuals confront the terror of existence which is beyond them, or asked to answer for their actions which are local to them. Thus, the affirmative burden is to designate a line of moral reasoning by which the hypothetical action in the resolution faces no moral injunction. An action that we may treat with indifference is morally permissible, so you affirm. And when we meet this burden, it would be morally necessary to treat the action as such with indifference and to refrain from place or blame lest the negative full or prove our full responsibility for the unfortunate situations that threaten human finitude and lives of innocence. There is no need to ascribe an immediate moral value to the continuation of life implied by the threat of death in the resolution. Plato speaks. The art of navigation not only saves men's lives, but their very bodies and all their property from the greatest dangers. And the master of the ship comes ashore and walks along the quay by his ship with an unassuming demeanor. He is reflecting upon the uncertainty of whether he has benefited any of his passengers by not letting them drown, whether he has not actually injured some of them, aware as he is that he has put them ashore or better in either body or soul than when they embarked. Anyone who has escaped drowning and is afflicted in his body with grave and incurable ailments continues to be wretched because he is not dead and has not benefited at all by the navigator. He knows this navigator that it is not better for a wicked man to live, for his life must of necessity be an evil one. The resolution presents an identical moral scenario. Without context, we cannot acquire sufficient moral knowledge to know that a particular action, a particular death is good or bad. As such, the action remains indifferent. Moreover, life and death are indifferent because they are not up to us. Iakivos Vasilau writes. The moral point of view is part of our nature right from the start. What explains our unhappiness then is that we wrongly apply preconceptions to stock in a general moral concept shared by all people because of our mistaken views about what is truly our own. Only the correct use of volition is our own and fully up to us. States affairs in the ordinary external world have no intrinsic value and cannot disturb the happiness of a person. What causes disturbance is a person's judgment about some impression. For example, that one values not dying or a child's life, but such things are not one's own and not up to us. Everyone is powerless in the face of fortune, death, etc. And most people at some point must deal with considerable adversity. The awesomeness of death confronts rationality and human freedom with a limit. The inevitability of an end is not up to us, it is indifferent. Indeed, death is absolutely indifferent, as Doe 4 writes. The ferryman of the dead looks at human life on earth from a vertiginous height and considers how foolish men's actions are, and one examines them while bearing in mind that their agents will soon die. To view things from above is to look at them from the perspective of death. In both cases, it means looking at things with detachment, distance, and objectivity, seeing them as they are in themselves, situating them within the immensity of the universe and the totality of nature, without the false prestige lent to them by human passions and conventions. The view from above changes our value judgments on things: luxury, power, war, borders, and the worries of everyday life all become ridiculous. The exercise of death has been since Plato, the very essence of philosophy. Thus, death is indifference par excellence. We cannot prohibit or mandate actions on the basis of death, moral wrongness. In addition, any hypothetical instantiation of the resolution would rise only as the result of indifferent factors. These factors lie beyond the control of any agent called upon to answer the question. The victim's innocence is not meant to suggest their lifelong freedom from wrongdoing. Rather, they are innocent because they did not walk into a life-threatening situation out of their own mouths, so their deaths are not up to them. Also, we would not blame the actor for making the decision to kill or not to kill. Both options would be permissible, and the stressful situation demands an open choice. Moral actors are not moral experts. It is unreasonable to expect everyone to follow the same moral rule, especially given compounding variables like friendship, family, age, and strength. Finally, matters of life and death are morally indifferent. Adobe 5 concludes. That which is good or bad depends on us, and that which does not depend on us is indifferent. The only thing that depends on us is the meaning we give to events. That which does not depend on us corresponds to the necessary linkage of cause and effect, the course and nature of the actions of other human beings. Thus, life and death, health and sickness, pleasure and suffering are all indifferent, because they do not depend on us. We should not introduce differences among them, but accept what happens. Do not try to make things happen the way you want, but want what happens to happen the way it happens, and you will be happy. So I.
Okay. What's the negative burden?
The negative burden is to prove that we are fully responsible for the threat to human finitude. Otherwise, death would not be up to us, so it would be indifferent.
Okay, why is that the burden?
That is the converse of the affirmative burden. The affirmative burden is to prove that the hypothetical action resolution is indifferent.
Morally permissible, right?
Well, that is the most general burden, but then I contextualize that
so
within
the most
indifference.
general burden is morally permissible. Now, what is the link between indifference and moral permissibility?
Well, I mean, first of all, is the definitional one at the very top, which says that to say that something is morally permissible is allowed. There's no injunction against it, which means that if something is neutral or indifferent, then that means we would not prohibit it. The next argument are Adobe 1 through 3, which proves that if an action is indifferent, then it would be a proactively good and necessary thing to recognize it as morally permissible.
It's proactively good to take the action, then? You know, to endorse
No,
this mindset?
it is proactively good to recognize it as indifferent and morally permissible.
Okay, so but it's proactively good to endorse this mindset, then, correct?
What do you mean by this mindset?
This mindset that death doesn't matter.
What?
This mindset that death doesn't matter, that we'll be happy, all the stuff you talk about in your case. It's good to endorse this mindset, correct?
It is good and necessary to endorse the mindset. Like, it's not a mindset argument, but
I mean,
to endorse the notion that
endorsing,
things that are indifferent are morally permissible.
So you're proactively endorsing that.
Wait,
great.
Hold on.
Okay.
Endorsing what?
Whatever
I don't want that to morph into the NC, which you probably will.
Whatever your case is, you are proactively endorsing
What is your understanding of whatever my case is?
I don't really care. It's irrelevant.
What?
I'm not going to link it to that. It's okay.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Don't stress out about it. All right. So, do you ever provide any sort of distinction between the act and omission?
That is totally irrelevant for
Okay,
my argument.
Cool. So, then, does morality have to serve as a guide for action?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay.
I mean,
so everything
that's nothing in the AC. That's not what the AC is about.
Yeah. Okay. So everything could be immoral.
What?
Everything could be immoral.
No.
Why not?
Because those things are indifferent. Everything is indifferent, not
What if I prove
immoral.
that everything is immoral? That is permissible. All right. That is okay with your framework, right?
No, that doesn't make sense because the category of immoral or prohibited would be in opposition to another category, permissible. We cannot have that category without some differentiation. Okay. So the conclusion everything is immoral does not make sense.
That's cool. Okay. So what exactly is this idea? Like death is sort of indifferent and death exists for all of us? Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, we all die. That's true. That is true. The thesis of my case is that matters of life and death and the hypothetical action of the resolution is morally indifferent. Death is not inherently bad. There is nothing intrinsically wrong with dying. The fact that we die is inevitable.
Is there some intrinsic feature of humans that we value?
Not necessarily.
I thought it was autonomy.
I mean, we do no. My argument is that we have no autonomy. We are in a crisis of autonomy. We do not control our actions. That is what Adobe 1 says. We are in a crisis of autonomy, not autonomy is a good.
But we're in a crisis of autonomy, so we want to fix that so we can.
No, you can't fix the crisis of autonomy because humans are not controlling the fact, like the lottery of birth and the fact that they die.
We can't fix the crisis of autonomy. Great. All right. All right. I'm gonna start at the idea, my negative case, and then I'm gonna go AC. Just gonna be kind of straightforward. Is everyone ready? Okay. His definition of morally permissible simply means that there's no obligation for a prayer for action either if there's indifferent. However, that means that the realm of permissibility includes both the optional and the obligatory. Mine, however, is the idea that permissible. Mine, however, says that morally permissible must be distinct from moral obligation. When we label an action morally permissible, we say that an agent has no obligation in regards to that action. She is free to do as she pleases. She permits to act in one of two ways, which logically entails that she does not have an obligation to act in either of these ways, since if she did not have another option, it would be impermissible. When we have a moral obligation in relation to an action, the agent no longer has a morally free choice, since one of the agent's responsible choices would commit the harm of moral harm of violating an obligation. Thus, moral permissibility implies a sphere of freedom for the agent and moral obligation mutually exclusive with the sphere. This must be the definition we prefer because any viable moral theory requires a tripartite division between obligatory, permissible, and blameworthy action. Moral systems that include negative obligation will say there's an obligation to refrain from action blameworthy is fulfilling refrain, and actions that are neither obligatory nor blameworthy. Similarly, moral systems deciding between two permissible actions of either eating ice cream or not eating ice cream, then I might consider whether eating ice cream will ruin my appetite for dinner. Obligatory actions, however, use only moral motives as a guide for determining actions. The consideration of non-moral motives in this case would be illicit. Thus, the inferential relations present when delivering on permission versus obligation are distinct, so we cannot have a single category which contains both the optional and the obligatory actions. Even if I'm losing my definition and they would that permissibility includes both categories, their argument shows that it's logically consistent to prove obligatory as permissible. If I show you that when you always make the stronger statement than the strongest statement you could possibly make in any scenario, then if you're not making that, you're making a statement false. So by proving that you are obligated to take the action in the resolution, that proves that the action is false, that is not morally permissible because that's not the strongest statement you make. This is because we necessarily interpret the meaning under the assumption of the statements that make the strongest sentence they make. For example, say there are 10 kids in my Spanish class. If you ask me how many kids are in your Spanish class, no one would think I answered accurately if I say there are 2 kids in my Spanish class. That's when we assert a statement. The truth of that statement must be enough for the assumption that it is the strongest statement on the subject. If the claim is weaker, then our statement will be false. We must evaluate statements in this way, otherwise we would never know the actual truth condition of the statement because they would always be structurally ambiguous. So the resolution is false if it makes a weaker claim about the moral standing of the resolution action than it could and should make. So since an obligation is much stronger claim than permission, proving that the resolution action is obligatory does not prove the resolution true, since an interpretive assumption just outlined the resolution simply means it is morally permissible but not morally obligatory to kill one innocent person and so on. Hence affirming by proving the action morally obligatory is like trying to prove the truth of the statement that my Spanish class has 2 kids by proving the statement that my Spanish class has 10 kids. Thus, go to the AC now. Remember, in cross-examination, I explicitly asked him, what does it mean when you say we have to positively endorse this mindset? He said we have to proactively endorse whatever the AC is claiming. That means regardless of what the AC is claiming, he's proactively endorsing it, not just saying that it's permissible. While it means that we should be indifferent to the mindset of death, he's proactively endorsing that we should spread this indifference. That means that he's saying we have some sort of positive obligation to actually take this action, meaning that he's biting into the NC. But regardless of that, let's go to his definition of morally permissible. First, against the definition of morally permissible, it simply says to allow. That makes absolutely no link to what something is indifference. Rather, indifference is simply talking about a mental state, i.e. we're indifferent to something because we simply don't care about it. Moral judgments, however, saying that something is morally permissible, it has nothing to do with your mental state, i.e. you can make a moral judgment about an action whether you're angry, sad, happy, indifferent, etc. So there's absolutely no link between moral permissibility and indifference. He has to win this link to win the round. Remember, even though he has absolutely no justification as to why this link, you should also prefer my definition of what it means to be indifferent, since that's the common usage of the term what it means to be indifferent, since we're referring to an emotional state. But secondly, in cross-examination, he also said that we're never going to be able to fix this crisis of autonomy while you endorse the AC. Remember the Vora analysis, all of the analysis simply says that we should always be indifferent to death insofar as otherwise we cause a crisis of autonomy. That means insofar as he's never going to be able to end the crisis of autonomy as conceded by CX because we can never be fully indifferent to death or whatever the warrant is. At the point when that's true, he's never going to be able to affirm because he's never going to actually fix the reason as to why we're going to take this action. So there'd be absolutely no reason to take the action in the first place. But then you can place general case turn. Death would not be, since insofar as he's claiming, all of his analysis claims that death is not a morally irrelevant feature, i.e. we would be indifferent to it. That means that there's absolutely no moral reason as to why we would care about death at that point, meaning that there's absolutely no reason to make a moral judgment about death because it's entirely irrelevant to morality. Insofar as death is a constant feature and it's not a morally relevant feature, it is not a feature taken into account into moral judgments. Insofar as moral permissibility is still a moral judgment, that means that it's going to not, he's never going to be able to meet as a definition. But then, second, once again, you can turn as a general case turn. He says that there's absolutely no reason as to why there's no distinction between an act or omission. Therefore, an act, like the resolution says, to kill is a proactive action and an autonomous choice to kill someone, whereas to save or to prevent, i.e. when we wouldn't save those other individuals, is simply to let them die. Remember, he's impacting back to ultimately the idea that we're having a crisis of autonomy. At the point when that's true, when we act, we are positively violating someone. So even if we don't care about the death, the relevant feature of that scenario is that we're violating someone based on some sort of conception of autonomy. Insofar as autonomy is still some sort of standard that he's trying to link to ultimately because we're trying to solve this crisis of autonomy, that means that an act has the morally relevant distinction of having some sort of autonomous violation, whereas an omission is simply being irrelevant or indifferent to death. Thus, you should always prefer minimizing the proactive autonomous violations of individuals because an omission would simply be indifferent to death, so that would be entirely consistent, so it could negate off of that. But then, finally, okay, so then once again, another general case turn, when he's talking about how death has to, the idea of autonomy being some sort of reason as to why we're looking to this crisis of faith, that means that even though we don't care about the actual death of the actor, when we act to kill them, we're violating their autonomy as agents, thus that would be proactively immoral insofar as autonomy is still some sort of criterion. But, sorry, quickly jump back to the burden analysis. So, at the top of the AC. Remember, he said that I have a very specific burden based on his NC. But in cross-examination, he admitted that the broader resolutional burden is simply to show that something is morally permissible. That means that if I'm cutting him off at this broader resolutional burden by showing that it's morally obligatory rather than morally permissible, or by any of the case terms that I place on this case, then that means that it's sufficient for you to negate. I don't need to meet his burden that's outlined in simply indifferent to it. At the point when that's true, there's still yet another distinction between being indifferent and allowed. Remember, he has to win this sort of the link between being indifferent and morally permissible. Otherwise, none of his impacts matter. His offense is entirely irrelevant. I've given you several very clear reasons as to why that's not true, and even if it were, you could date up to the NC.
Do you ever prove that the resolutional action is obligatory?
I see your case does that.
Where?
Well, you say your case proactively endorses the mindset that we should be indifferent to death. At the point when you
Wait, why does that mean I am obligating killing one to save many?
Because you're proactively saying we should take this action since this is a positively good outcome. It's not simply allowable.
Okay. Let's say the speed limit on a road is 25 miles per hour. Am I allowed to go 23 miles per hour? Is that permitted by the law?
Sorry, repeat your question.
If the speed limit is 25 miles per hour, is it permitted if I go 23 miles per hour? Would I be arrested?
If you are referring to like the general overview,
I'm like in that example.
That's
would I be
extremely
arrested?
non-responsive to the negative case for
How?
several reasons.
How? That's exactly what the NC talks about, right?
No, it says that this distinction A must be clear and that there's a very clear distinction between the two
all right.
categories.
Just to clarify my intentions, I am questioning the mutual exclusivity of obligatory and permissibility. Okay? So, as an example, to illustrate that point,
right?
If the speed limit is 25 miles per hour, that is the rule, and I'm going 23 miles per hour, is that permissible? Does the law prohibit that?
That's like a flawed analogy for morality. If you look to the very first reason I gave you an actual moral instance in which if you conflate obligatory and permissible, you come to the wrong conclusion. The second one also provides another relevant moral difference, and the third argument I made is irrelevant of whether or not I win my definition.
All right, that's cool. All right, yeah. So let's talk about the stronger moral statement, all right? Right now, in order to talk about the truth, would I say I am debating, or I'm debating, and I'm standing, and I'm Jake Nebel, and I am finals right now?
That's not the stronger moral statement.
What is the stronger statement? The stronger statement is when we do not omit things, right?
The stronger statement is when you are actually being closer to the truth value, right?
How do you get closer to the truth?
Okay, like for example, there are 10 kids in my Spanish class, right? Mm-hmm. You ask me how many kids are in my Spanish class, and I answer 2 kids. While that would be under the speed limit, as per your analogy, that's clearly an inaccurate answer to that.
What if I said?
If that was not so, the truth conditions of any statement would be hugely structurally ambiguous.
All right, that's all right. All right. So let's say, to reword the example in an unbiased way, what if I used a statement instead of a question and just random response? So there were at least 2 kids in my Spanish class. That omits the entire truth, that there are 10, right? But I'm still telling the truth, that there are indeed at least 2 kids in my Spanish class, right?
You would be A, the least 2 kids part, it's not there. There are 2 kids. But B, then that creates structural ambiguity.
If I said that though, even though it is the weaker statement, it is still true, right?
I tell you that is not how we judge the truth value of statements. You are not actually
what is the metric by which we determine the truth value of statements?
The strongest statement you can make. That's very clearly what my argument says.
All right, nice. Minutes and 25 seconds remaining. Starting with the second sentence of the affirmative case.
The second sentence?
Yeah, it's probably the first argument after. So the value is relevant.
Wow. Okay.
Extend that the resolution lacks a specified actor, so affirming depends that the resolution statement is morally sound. Not that it is obligatory, maximum, laudable action, or possible scenario. This delinks me from the NC because I'm not actually proving that it's an obligatory maxim. She dropped this definitional analysis which says affirming does not have to prove that it's permissible. So the only argument you're going to look to potentially for why the affirmative case links in is that I'm proactively endorsing something. So go to the proactive endorsement argument. First, my answer to cross-examination was very specific. I said, no, don't conflate with me saying I proactively endorse the killing of one person to save many. I am proactively endorsing the notion of indifference towards fate. So those are 2 distinct things. In cross-examination, I explicitly told her not to conflate my argument. That's exactly what she's doing. Second, there's no logical connection between just endorsing something and making it obligatory. So even if this were true, even if you gave your full weight on the argument, I would not bite into the NC. So the NC is just completely irrelevant because there is no argument in the round which proves that it's obligatory, so there's nothing wrong with saying it's permissible. Then, go to the first two responses to the argument about why, definition of permissibility. Her first response says that indifference is simply a mental state. However, indifference is not a mental state. It is a disposition towards our actions. It is a disposition. We view it as not having any moral injunction against it. We do not make moral judgment on that action, just like we do not make a moral judgment on a storm. We are indifferent to it. Then option two argument said that in CX I say that I can never fix the crisis of autonomy. Oh no, there's a reason why I said what? Because she's misconceptualizing my argument. I'm not trying to fix the crisis of autonomy. I'm trying to welcome the crisis of autonomy. The entire point of the first Doe analysis, which you can extend, is that all morality must address the crisis of autonomy, which is inevitable. Humans are not free to be beautiful, strong, healthy, rich. Our lives depend on external causes, and we are helpless in the face of misfortune. In other words, we have to treat the crisis of autonomy as inevitable. We have to understand that it is indifferent, and we will be unhappy unless we recognize that it is an inevitable thing. That is my argument. She is confusing it as the opposite. Then, go to the three case terms. Option number one, which says that indifference means that we're not going to care about things and it's not moral about death. Yeah, that just means that we cannot use moral judgments to describe death. This is exactly just restating the affirmative thesis. There's no reason why death is a bad thing, so this term does not have an impact. It's not even a term. Option number 2 and 3 arguments, which are both appealing to the notion of autonomy and how I don't distinguish between active and omission agency. I never say that autonomy is key to morality. In fact, I deny that question in cross-examination. I'm not saying autonomy is a moral thing. We never have autonomy, so this argument does not make sense. Furthermore, since she's granting a Doe, the fact that we do not have absolute autonomy means that the notion of an acts or omissions thing, whatever she's talking about, does not make sense. Whatever distinction she's trying to draw does not make sense given the Doe analysis. Then, go to the two responses to the negative burden about how, the two responses to the negative burden that she read after the case strength, but signed on the frame. The number one response, which says that the broader resolutional burden is to prove why death is morally permissible, and she cuts it off. This is contingent on her winning. In fact, the warrant for this argument was that because, as long as it is obligatory, then it's cutting my burden off. But there's no argument in the round which says that killing one to save many is obligatory. Even if even if the maxim is even if the notion of indifference is necessary to apply to fate, that does not mean that killing one to save many is obligatory. Then, the number 2 argument says that allowed means I'm not sanctioning it. There's no reason why, to say something is okay means I have to sanction that thing or encourage it. She's making very weak semantic distinctions, and there's no reason why this argument comes before mine. So, I've already extended a Doe 1 to extend the affirmative burden, which is to prove that the hypothetical action in the resolution faces no moral injunction. Also extend the negative burden, which is to prove that we are fully responsible for the threats of human finitude. Otherwise, death is not up to us, so it is indifferent. Meaning, I've already won the round because she's not linked to this affirmative burden. To the negative burden. But in order to link to the affirmative burden, extend vast law, which says that ordinary states of affairs have no intrinsic value. They cannot make us unhappy. Only the meaning we give to offense can disturb us. We should not ascribe moral meaning to death. It is not up to us. We are all powerless in the face of that. Therefore, the awesomeness of death is indifferent. We cannot control it, so it is not moral. It is not an immoral thing. It is not good or bad. It is not obligatory. In fact, it is simply indifferent. We should simply tolerate it and say it is permissible. Go to the end. I've already delinked myself, however, even if it's not true. Off the mutually exclusive argument, the point in cross-examination is that it doesn't apply to other examples. For instance, I can go underneath the speed limit, and that is permissible, even though it is also obligatory to go underneath the speed limit because doing so would be illegal. Then, off the argument about we use the stronger moral statement, that's not true. It doesn't work with other examples. That's what you'll notice. If I say there are at least 2 kids in my Spanish class, that is a weaker truth. However, it is still true. So if you just use any other example, her argument's wrong.
Okay, so we'll be starting at the definition of morally permissible on the AC, and we'll actually go down to the AC and then to the MC. Is everybody ready? Okay, so I made 2 very crucial responses that delinked him from indifference to morally permissible. He fundamentally messed up in his last speech because he failed to fully address these. First, in response to the argument that indifference is simply an emotional state, he said it's a disposition. A disposition is an emotional stance you take on something, i.e. I'm disposed to feel happy about something, or I'm disposed to feel sad about something. I, however, explicitly said that morality is a judgment. A judgment can be made no matter what attitude you're disposed to take, i.e. whether you're indifferent or whether you're angry or not. That means morally permissible is not the same thing as indifferent. He proved my argument by trying to define indifferent as taking a disposition that simply feeds into the argument. At the point when morally permissible and indifferent are delinked, he conceded that morally permissible is the broad burden that he has to link to. He's failing to link to it based on this cleanly extended argument. His argument may actually fed into it. It was a blip. There was absolutely no delineation drawn between them. I'm the only one doing sufficient articulation for you to actually buy my argument. But then, he said that morally sanctioned, there was absolutely no word as to why something has to be morally sanctioned. But there was. I told you that insofar as he's saying that moral permissibility means that you are allowed to do something, that means morality is taking a stance on it. Morality is saying it is okay, it is sanctioned by morality. If morality is indifferent to something, that does not take a stance on it, it does not sanction it, it does not say it is okay or give it the sign of approval because it is indifferent to it. That means per his very explicit definition of moral indifferent. These are two very cleanly extended links. His only responses were little blips because he was trying to, just sort of pass them off, but they're crucial because he has to win both of these arguments to extend any piece of offense to show why it actually meets his broader resolutional burden. In the case where he fails to meet his broader resolutional burden, you are going to negate because he fails to satisfy the truth conditions of the resolution, meaning that the resolution automatically must be false. It is not true, but obviously the only other option is false. So, very clearly, that wins. But then let's go to the first case turn I made. He said that we're not using a moral judgment to describe this action, so the case turn doesn't bite. But we are using a moral judgment, hence moral permissibility. When you say something is morally permissible, it is a classification of a moral judgment. That is why the word moral is in the resolution. That is why he's trying to extend things as linking back to morally permissible. At the point when that's true, insofar as any of his analysis is correct and that we should be indifferent to death, that means that death is not a relevant feature of any sort of moral judgment. So morality, if it is indifferent to death, means that it does not account death in any sort of moral judgment. That includes actions that are saying something is morally permissible. At the point when that's true, even if you do buy that I have a specific burden to show something about being indifferent to death, I am meaning that through this clear turn onto this case that shows you why his action is not being morally permissible. So that's another way you can negate. But now let's get to the idea of the NC. So he says that we're showing something's indifferent and that endorsing is not necessarily what an obligation is. However, to say that something is indifferent, if you buy that he's winning the definition of morally permissible, means that it's simply allowed. To endorse is clearly different from allowing. He says that we're not endorsing the obligation to kill individuals, but what he's endorsing is that we create this this indifference. And the way that we do this indifference is obviously by affirming. Otherwise, he wouldn't say, I affirm. There'd be absolutely no reason to vote. So by creating, the way we create this indifference is through positively taking the affirmative action. That means that he's showing that there is a proactive reason to endorse or take the affirmative action. It's not merely permissible, rather, it is actually obligatory. He's trying to conflate the idea that he's trying to say that he's not taking an action, but he is. He's taking the resolutional action, and the reason may be because he's indifferent to death, but it's still endorsing the resolution action as obligatory. That gives me the only link I need into for my NC, so let's go to the NC now. He tries to say that there's no mutual exclusivity, because if we go under the speed limit, then that means that it is sufficient. But I don't necessarily have to show, all I have to claim, or all I have to show is that these are two distinct categories, so by meeting one category, you do not meet the other. He completely dropped my second justification, so even if you don't like this argument, on strength of link alone, it is the best argument for you to vote on in the round. So you can extend the justification. It tells you that insofar, when we deliberate about things that are morally permissible, we can use non-moral motives to guide us, i.e., we can decide whether I feel like eating ice cream or I feel like eating cake, etc. However, when we say that something is obligatory, we only look to moral motives. That means that the inferential relations between things are distinct, so they are two distinct categories. That means when he shows that we proactively endorse this idea of indifference, it is obligatory. That is a distinct category from morally permissible. This is sufficient for you to negate, because that means he's not meeting the resolutional burden, and rather I'm showing that it is not morally permissible, rather it is morally obligatory. Nothing inconsistent with that. But then, let's say that you still don't buy that. I said even if you're conceding that he's winning his definition, it would still be untrue based on the argument about the stronger statement. While you may have thought that his examples were funny in cross-examination, he gave no warrant in the last speech. He said it's not true with other examples, and he gives the example of at least two people. First, the example of at least two people is not answering the resolutional question, or the question of the Spanish class. Insofar as saying how many people are in your Spanish class, you answer how many people. You don't say at least two people. That's placing a qualification on the answer to the statement. But secondly, he didn't actually answer the warrant, which says that this makes all statements structurally ambiguous. So you can clearly extend the argument. Once again, the strength of link is very clear here that we necessarily interpret meaning under the assumption that statements make the strongest claim that can be made. For example, say there are 10 kids in my Spanish class. If you ask me how many kids are in your Spanish class, no one would think I answered accurately if I said there are 2 kids in my Spanish class. That's when we assert a statement of the truth of the statement must be judged with the assumption that it is the strongest statement of the subject. If the claim is weaker, then our statement will be false. We evaluate statements in this way, otherwise we never know the actual truth condition of statements because it would always be structurally ambiguous. So if the resolution is false if it makes a weaker claim about the moral standing of the resolution action than it could make. It is making the weaker claim because he's proactively saying that it's obligatory. At the point when that's true, the resolution is false proactively because it's making the weaker claim. So here's how the round plays out. He's de-linked from morally permissible in two very clean ways. Then there's the case term, which I'm also winning, and then there's the two clean extensions of the NC, which you have to buy purely on strength of link, and one is true even if they're not mutually exclusive. That's the idea.
we're just going to kind of talk about crystallization stuff in general, and then AC and C. She insists on weighing in terms of the strength of the link, but that doesn't really make sense if there is no offense in the strict sense. You can look through the flow all you want, but you're not going to find a single argument which says it is not okay, it is not permissible to kill people. The only way that she can get around it is by proving that it is obligatory, and that somehow means that it is not permissible. However, the only reason why this is okay is if I prove that it is obligatory. Otherwise, there's no reason around why it is obligatory and not permissible. And you can go to the top of the affirmative case where I distance myself from that. In cross-examination, I made a very deliberate point of saying, do not conflate my argument that it is proactively good to recognize fate as indifferent as saying it is morally, like I am proactively endorsing killing one to save many. Those two arguments were distinct, and I said, do not conflate them in the NC, and she promised not to do that, but she did. There is nothing in the 1AC which says it is proactively good, or even it is obligatory, or it is a laudable maxim to kill one to save many. That is not my argument. Indifference may be morally good, but that does not mean that killing one to save many is. That is simply indifferent. Then, extend the argument out of the top, which says that because there's no action in the resolution, the affirmative doesn't have to defend it as an obligatory maxim, a laudable action, or possible scenario. Also extend that something is morally permissible if we allow it. If it is indifferent, that means there is no sort of moral injunction against it, which means my argument, which is that there is no moral injunction against killing, simply proves that it is indifferent. When I prove that it is indifferent, that means that there is no way to forbid it, there is no injunction against it, we are not injunction against it. We are not taking a stance on death. When we are not taking a stance, that means it is okay. There is no injunction against it. I'm clearly winning this argument. Then go to a DOE 1. We extend a DOE 1, which says that all morality must address crisis of autonomy. Humans are not free to be beautiful, strong, healthy, or rich. Our lives depend on external causes, and we are helpless in the face of misfortune. Which means that we will be unhappy if we passively seek to acquire things that we cannot obtain and flee inevitable events. Which means that we must recognize indifferent things which are actually indifferent, and those things become morally permissible. We would not complain about them. We would not take a stance on them that is saying they are morally bad. The only argument which she might possibly use is like the moral sanctioning argument. However, extend my response to moral sanctioning, which says that there's no reason that if I say something is okay, something is permissible, I'm sanctioning it. What she tries to do in the NR is morph this argument and say, well, by saying something is moral, I'm sanctioning. However, this ignores the fact that I'm just saying it is morally permissible. It is okay. I'm not saying that we should endorse this action. The only other way she could beat the framework is through the extension of the argument about how indifference is a mental state. However, extend my response, which says that it is merely a disposition. The response is that, well, I'm talking about things like happy and sad. Yes, happy and sad are emotional states. However, indifference is the rejection of happy and sad. We are not happy and sad. We are not emotional. Indifference is the lack of emotion towards those things. It is the refusal to make moral judgment. Anything becomes morally permissible. So extend the affirmative burden, which is to prove that the hypothetical action in the resolution faces no moral injunction. I'm clearly winning this. We extend Vassal, which is the only affirmative voting issue. Ordinary states of affairs like death have no intrinsic value. They cannot make us unhappy. Only the meaning we give to events can disturb us. We should not ascribe moral meaning to death because it is not up to us. We are all powerless in the face of death. This means that we cannot control death. We will not complain about death. No act of killing or anything like that would have any sort of injunction against it. This means it is permissible. This is a clear 1AR story. Either way, when she's extending the arguments in the NC about how if it is obligatory, then that means it is not permissible, that story does not make sense. When she just keeps on re-articulating these same exact examples, but if you read the arguments and you try and rephrase any of the examples, none of the arguments make sense.